Hi, Gina with today's thought, and today we're going to talk about, well, it will be about a specific subject mostly, but there's also a general subject. I guess this could be an example of the problems that arise or the effects, which I consider bad, and I think many of you will too, and many of our friends on the left would admit, seeing this administration. This is what happens when you fill your presidential cabinet with affirmative action hires who have little or no knowledge of or experience of the purview of their appointment. In this case, we're talking about Pete Buttigieg. He's gay, and if you ever watched Seinfeld, the old Seinfeld episode, he's gay. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but what is wrong is that he is the transportation secretary, even though his total background is being the mayor of some small town. He has no experience in transportation, and yet he is the transportation secretary. And not only, he is so bad, as somebody joked, Pete Buttigieg is so bad at his job that the American people know who the Secretary of Transportation is, because usually you don't know. I mean, he's just, it's not like Secretary of State. You don't know who he is, but he is so bad at his job that a lot of people know who he is. Now, he made a statement about, the problem that the Democrats, the left, the woke climate alarmists are having is that they want to force all of us into electric cars. So they kind of browbeat all these auto companies into building electric cars. And they're finding out, Ford just announced today that they were supposed to produce electric cars. They're delaying the production of electric cars. I believe, I just heard it in passing, but I believe the production of electric cars until 2030 and electric trucks until 29. Now, I could be wrong on that, so you can correct me in the comments, but that's what I recall hearing. Anyways, the point is that people are not buying the cars. They're not selling. That's why Ford is delaying the production of the cars. The cars, electric cars, are piling up on the dealership lots, and nobody is buying them, or very few people are buying them. And even in China, somebody was touting the other day how many electric cars are being sold in China, but I saw an article a day ago, I think, about China having the same problem, that there are just these electric cars piling up. And these are people who actually bought the cars sometimes, and they're just not, they're not practical to use. The technology is not there. And that's really what we're going to get to today, because Buttigieg was questioned about that. Why about the electric cars and the fact that nobody is buying them. And I'm going to play, I'll have my comments. I'm going to play you the tape. Here's what he said, and then I'll come back with my comments and show you what an idiotic statement that is. But I think you're going to know yourself just by listening to it. Anyway, here's Petey.
EVs aren't popular, so why are you jamming them down our throats? And this is how Pete Buttigieg responded.
The automotive sector is moving toward EVs, and we can't pretend otherwise. Sometimes when these debates happen, I feel like it's the early 2000s, and I'm talking to some people who think that we can just have landline phones forever.
All right, you heard what he said. Now, in case you don't know why that was an idiotic statement, just plain stupid, that not buying an electric car, not switching to electric cars is like not switching to landlines. And the point that he's missing is, here I'm going to show you now. This is a very interesting historical photo. This is the first cell phone. The first cell phone ever made, and the gentleman, by the way, this is an interesting historical trivia part. The gentleman holding that phone is Martin Cooper. Martin Cooper, the inventor of the cell phone. So if you want to know who invented the cell phone, there he is, Martin Cooper. It was invented in 1973. Now, here's the point that I want to make. I had a landline like we all did, and imagine in 1973, this is what's really dumb about what BUTTIGIEG'S said. You see how big that phone is. It's big. It's like a World War II walkie-talkie. It's the size of a brick. It's bigger than a brick, and it probably weighs a couple of pounds at least. So imagine that the Biden administration had been the administration then when the cell phone had been invented, and he decreed, put pressure on the phone companies to make these big, bulky phones, and then pass laws to restrict the use of landlines. And the point being, to force us into carrying these giant cell phones along with us because the government decided that we should have them. Now, you can imagine what a catastrophe that would be. Would you like to carry one of those things around all the time? Would you like to have your landline taken away from you, or maybe prices, the phones run on batteries, so maybe raise the price of electricity so you don't want to use or put a tax on landlines, et cetera, to force you into these phones. Can you imagine how horrible that would be? Could you imagine that people just wouldn't buy them? They didn't. That was invented in 1973. Nobody bought those. Well, I would say nobody. Probably a few people did. And there's a scene, if you remember, a movie called Wall Street, starring Martin Sheen's Charlie Sheen. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, there's a scene where I believe he or Michael Douglas, who played the kind of the evil guy, holding one of these large phones. I think it was Michael Douglas. Anyways, but other than that, not too many people bought those things. But now everyone has one. And why? And landlines are falling out of use. Why is that? Because the technology over many years, over decades, starting from before I would suspect, or would not surprise me, many of you watching this were not even born. So the technology gradually improved, and as it did, the people started to buy them. The point was, I remember when I got my first cell phone, and you folded it, it was like a flip phone, they call them. You folded it in half, but it was very primitive, and it had a little antenna on it. You had to pull out the antenna and hold the antenna. And I remember having to meet relatives for a family function, and on the bus, and I was late, and I was running late, and I was trying to call them on the cell phone, and the signal just would not get through. Now, of course, you call anybody in the world, and the phones work flawlessly. Unless you have certain phone companies, I won't mention them. Sometimes your phone's not going to work, but even that is rare. But the point is that people voluntarily, that's the point, they voluntarily bought cell phones as they got smaller, and it made sense for them to buy them, and they were better than a landline. I don't even have a landline anymore. I just don't need it because I don't need the phone or the answering machine, because there's voicemail. Everything is on my phone. So now you get back to the cars, these electric cars. So you have this is very interesting. One of the ways they're trying to force us in these cars is by restricting, obviously, as we all know, the drilling for fossil fuels, so that on the one hand, we are drilling more than we were when Biden took office, but it's not nearly enough, because the demand for fossil fuels has gone beyond that. I think we're producing 11 million barrels a day, and we need, I think it was 14 or 16, many more millions of barrels than we're doing. The point being that they want want to drive up the price of gas so that the electric cars will become practical. But they're still not. They have all these charging stations, but they don't have nearly enough. And the government, that's the other thing. The first cars, some of them were electric and some of them were steam, and gas finally worked. It won the contest for practicality, but you had to start out with very few gas pumps to put gas into your car, and generally more and more stations got built, but they weren't built by the government. They were not financed by the government. They were financed by the oil companies because, I mean, they're still, today when you see them, like Exxon or Shell, those are named after the oil companies. They built them. The government did not have to build the gas stations, but these climate crazies want us to spend. It probably over time would amount to trillions of dollars to build these charging stations, and they're not practical. You have to sit there and you have to wait for the thing to charge. You have to. The range, the distance that you can drive, so far from what I've read, does not actually, in practical use, equal the advertised distance that you get. Just like when you buy a gas car, they say you get 35 miles, 30 miles a gallon. Quote, your mileage may vary. In the cold, they won't function in the cold. Sometimes these batteries, they go dead. If you get stuck in a snowdrift or something and you want to run the heat, you won't. You'll drain the battery much faster than you would use up the gas in your car. And on and on and on. They're not just practical. Now, I want to be fair, there is a solution to this that the Israelis came up with, actually, our friends the Israelis, but it's not practical yet, or they would have done it. I mean, now Israel, they discovered these oil fields. They're swimming in oil now, but before they didn't have much oil, and they had to import it from a lot of Arab countries who, under the table would not admit that they were selling their oil to Israel. But so this is when they came up with this idea. They don't need it now, and it's not practical yet, but it's very simple. Imagine that you drive into your electric car, you drive into your gas station, the battery is going down. Any gas station that you would now, I mean, that's how many, you wouldn't have to build new stations, but what you would have, you drive in, and in a room of the back of the gas station or an annex, there is a whole rack of batteries that are maybe this big, okay? This big, and then your car is a battery, and then they do, just as they do in the music industry, there's a computer, I'm a musician, protocol called MIDI that allows various, Yamaha will make a keyboard, and then Roland will make, or Alesis will make a drum machine or whatever, and they all work together. You can all, in the beginning, they were all proprietary. Everybody had their own system, but they all got together, and they agreed on a common system for all, and then the sales really exploded because any musical device would work with any other musical device. So you would want that design the cars any way you want, but there would be the car industry would get together. There would be a standard size of the battery and where the connections were on the battery and the plugs and all that. And then you pull into a gas station, a little forklift device, guy drives out a little forklift device, pulls out your old battery, puts it in the rack to charge, then pulls out a fresh battery, puts it in your car, and off you go. Now that would make sense. And then you would just build these into existing gas stations, and it would be practical enough that the electric car manufacturers could afford to do it. So, or whoever else, but it would not have to be the government. That's number one. But the number two, the technology is not there yet. The whole floor of an electric car these days, that's the battery. It takes up the whole floor, and the problem is that you need the whole battery. All this, I read one story. Somebody had a minor fender bender, okay, minor fender bender, which would be nothing. You could still drive your car and it would have a dent in it, but you're okay, right? And maybe you would, your insurance. The bill to fix that car, that fender bender, was $42,000. Think of that, $42,000. Why? Because the battery was in the floor, and the fender bender, it hit the edge of the battery, and the whole battery had to be replaced, and it cost $42,000. That's most of the price of a car. And then you also have the weight of the car, because it's this heavy battery. So these climate crazies, the idea is to prevent pollution or whatever. Because the cars are so heavy, the tires wear out faster. And if you didn't know, the tires throw out little tire particles that go into the air, and they do that more than a gas-powered car because the car is heavier, and it probably wears. I don't know this for sure. You can correct me on this, but I believe reading that it also wears out the roads quicker because the cars are heavier. And then, you can see, I have one more thought. I'm hesitating here because I'm trying to remember what it was. But I remember what it was. Somebody, a congressman, introduced a bill either this morning or yesterday. I'm recording this the day before you're seeing it, by the way. But it was very interesting. It was a joke. He ended up withdrawing the bill but it made a good point. He said these charging stations where you're charging the batteries, those are powered. The electricity to do that comes from fossil fuels, from your regular power plants, which, by the way, would these climate crazies. What's wrong with nuclear power? France gets 85% of her power from nuclear, and we could do the same thing. But of course, these crazies, they don't, because they're Earth worshippers, and we must get all our power from the wind and the sun. So this congressman introduced a bill, say, okay, you want to save the environment, the power, not just the electricity to power the electric cars. Okay, it comes from the charger, but the electricity to the charger must come from renewables, from windmills, and the sun must power the chargers to charge the car. And of course, nobody would vote for it because you can't. The renewables cannot produce the electricity to power the car. So if every car becomes electric, then you're going to need more electricity, much more than now, which means more fossil fuels, unless you switch to nuclear, which they don't want to do either, to power these cars. So you see how crazy this is. But getting back to Buttigieg, the point that he's making, I mean, that the point about what he said, why it's so idiotic, is that nobody forced people into cell phones. It was completely voluntary. And from the time that the first cell phone was made in 1973, so it would be, we'll say 2005, that cell phones started becoming, everybody has one. And I think could be even later than that. So you're talking about literally decades. So maybe 20, 30 years from now, electric cars will be practical. The kind of battery, the compact battery that I talked about, maybe they will exist by then. But the idea of forcing us into the cars now, as I said, it's just idiotic. And I guess I'll end on this. Same thing with cars. Well, automobile. When the automobile, everybody rode horses, or they had horse-drawn carriages in the cities, and nobody forced anybody. Nobody said, okay, well, now the cars are here, everybody's going to have to go out and buy a car and get rid of your horses. And this is before there are roads, concrete roads all over the place to drive them on, and so on and so forth. So again, I cannot emphasize how stupid this is and how screwed we are, having people like Pete Buttigieg in the cabinet and essentially running this country. And I am just praying. Pray along with me, okay? Let's all hold hands and pray along together that this administration and this president do not get a second term. And that's my thought for today. Thanks for stopping by. If you could subscribe, that would really be great. Comments always welcome below the video. Share. Oh, let me just apologize for a second, because there was one of the videos that I did a couple of thoughts ago was about how Donald Trump and Jon Stewart did the same thing in putting a price on their homes, and it generated a lot of comments. And some people, I'm a licensed real estate broker in New York City, and I tried to explain how some of these people, they say there's no comparison, that they literally don't know what they're talking about. I said to one, I think it's like arguing with Ben Carson, who was a famous neurologist, arguing with him about brain surgery. If you argue, every broker knows that they did exactly the same thing, and it's total hypocrisy if Letitia James doesn't either charge Jon Stewart, or the case against Trump gets either dropped or dismissed by a higher court. So, but I'm getting off the track, and I'll probably get more comment. If you have comments on that, please go back to the video that covers the subject, okay, the actual subject. I think people would appreciate it. But I just want to, I always say your comments are welcome, but please be respectful. But I think it got, as I said, I am a real estate broker, so I might have gotten a little hot under the collar, and I might have been just a little disrespectful and a little harsh on a couple of you. So I just want to apologize. Your questions are welcome, like everybody else's. I stand by what I said, but I am sorry in some cases for the way I said it. So that's it. If you could subscribe, that would really be great. Share this video with anyone you think would benefit from it. But most of all, come back and see me again. I would love to see all of you again. And until I do see all of you again, if I do, bye.